Hi everybody, Peggy McGuire here, and today's topic is the short and informal technical report. This is going to be in contrast to the long analytical research reports that we talked about last time, so keep that in mind as we move forward. So, when we are writing informal reports of a technical nature, you still have the goal of helping people to make decisions the same way that we discussed when we talked about longer analytical research reports. However, there are some specific differences in informal reports, which are usually shorter. First of all, writing these reports requires no extended planning, and therefore they should take relatively little time to prepare. They don't contain or very rarely contain much background information on the issue at hand or on the question that's being addressed. They do not usually include any kind of front or end matter supplements, so you won't have things like tables of contents or appendices or glossaries or anything like that on a short informal report. Actually, often these kinds of reports will take the form of a memo if they're being distributed by email. Might have such a report in a PDF attachment. So you would send a memo by email that says, "Here is the report that I promised you," or "Here is the report that we agreed to produce by today," and then you would attach the actual informal report as a PDF file. But remembering that memos of this kind are almost always internal, if this progress report or this short informal report is going to an external client, it would probably be a letter. Okay? So, broadly speaking, we have two types of informal short reports. One type would be the informational report. This is a brief, timely update that keeps everybody running smoothly, keeps everybody on the same page within an organization, so that everybody has a body of shared knowledge and shared information. And the kinds of issues we address in order to keep everybody on the same page in an organization are things like, let's say, for instance, you're a committee that has been charged with doing something within an organization. So what you're doing is sharing with everyone in that organization things like what we're doing now, what progress we have made on whatever task was charged to us, what activities happened over the last week, what happened at a staff meeting, what results we got from a survey we conducted, that kind of thing, where you have a smaller group internally that's been tasked with something, they do it or they're in the process of doing it, and they want to let everybody know where they're at, so everybody's on the same page. The other kind of short informal report can be more analytical. So this is going to look a lot, in short form, a lot more like your research project, because you're offering information and you're also interpreting that information and drawing conclusions from that information. So it has the sort of intent is much more like that of a full research report. The purpose of the writer is to accurately interpret a small body of information, to evaluate it, to draw valid conclusions from it, and to make persuasive recommendations. Again, very much like the purpose of the longer analytical research report. But it's on a small matter with a smaller piece of information and smaller outcomes. Okay? So, for instance, we're talking about the feasibility of a project. This is going to be a brief report that tells us why this project is feasible. We should proceed with the plan because this plan has some strengths and weaknesses. I believe this is the best course of action because. So you're making recommendations on some smaller issue or question to be addressed. Okay? So remembering that we have either informational reports or analytical reports. Now let's break things down a little more and look at the different varieties of informal reports that you might need to generate for an organization within an organization. First of all, your general periodic activity report. This is for some sort of ongoing enterprise, and what you want to do is regularly update people on what's going on with that group of people within your organization. So, the periodic activity report will summarize general activities during a defined period of time. Now, let's be very clear here. What I'm not talking about right now is a progress report. I'll talk about that at much more length later. This is not about a particular project where you're telling me how things are going. This is about general activities during defined periods over time. Okay? These kinds of activity reports are almost always internal. Often, for instance, employees writing to supervisors so that the supervisor can monitor what kind of work the employees are doing. Nevertheless, even though they're internal, they still must state all of the vital facts accurately, clearly, in sufficient detail. So these are the kinds of reports that are often referred to as status reports. And notice, status reports come at defined periods of time. So your supervisor may ask you to update her or him weekly in a status report, or once a month. So this kind of periodic activity report will always cover some defined period of time and will happen regularly. Another kind of reports, if you're an employee who is lucky or unlucky enough to do traveling as a part of your job, then you are going to need to generate trip reports, because your company, your employer wants to know what you did during the time you were away, how much money you spent, and what you learned through that experience. So, these trip reports are documents, again, brief documents, that employees would write for employers to document any kind of business-related travel during a specific period. How much did it cost? And did I get my money's worth? That's what I want to know. If I, as your employer, gave you permission or asked you to take a business trip, then I want to know that my money was spent wisely. So part of the purpose here is for the employee to show how was the money spent, how much did it cost, and was it worth the investment. But also, employers want to know, especially for professional development or continuing education activities, employers want to know that their employees actually learn something through the experience of business travel. So these trip reports can help the employer feel at ease that the employees actually learned something as a result of the investment. Meeting minutes, very common use of short reports. Whenever there is a meeting within an organization, people want to know what happened at the meeting. And it's important to have a paper trail for any decisions that were made in a meeting. But especially if you miss a meeting, you want to have some way of knowing what happened. All right? So, meeting minutes are written records of what happens during a meeting, a team meeting, a project meeting, and usually this report is based on notes that someone took while the meeting was going on. You usually, very often, have a designated person, and that person may change with each meeting, but you always want to have a designated person taking notes and then someone writing the report based on those notes. So this report is usually written and then distributed to everyone in the organization, and perhaps any other interested parties. There might be people outside of the immediate organization who need to know what's going on at these meetings. Um, Again, the purpose being so that everyone can keep track of what happens at meetings, even if not everyone attended the meeting. And, very important, to remind everyone of their responsibilities, of what roles they need to play, of the responsibilities that they agreed to take on during the meeting. Often at staff meetings, for instance, you will have people either volunteering to do something in particular, or you will have your supervisor appointing people to do something particular. Well, the meeting minutes help to make a record of that and to remind everyone what they agreed to do. All right. So when you write meeting minutes, you always make sure that you include the date of the meeting, the names of everybody who attended the meeting, what were the agenda items, what were the key points discussed during the meeting, and then, most important, what decisions or conclusions were made during the meeting. Very important role of the meeting minutes is to clearly articulate what decisions were made, what plans were made, what conclusions were drawn. All right? So that so that everybody has a shared common agreement and understanding of what happened. Another variety of short informal report is the feasibility report. So someone has made a proposal, and now that we all know what proposals are, someone has put out an idea, a plan, a course of action, and people within an organization need to make a decision about whether or not that proposal will work, whether the plan is a good one, whether the course of action is realistic and practical for this organization. All right. So, and this is often the supervisor or the head of the organization making this decision based on the report being written by people within the organization. So, I've been asked to look at a proposal that was written to do something within the organization. What I'm looking for is this plan, is the thing that's being proposed likely to succeed? Do its benefits outweigh its drawbacks and risks? Or vice versa? What are the pros and cons of accepting this proposal or following this course of action? Should anything be done based on this idea, based on this plan? Or should we wait? Is the timing right? Etc. So, a feasibility report is a thoughtful response to something that's being proposed with these questions in mind. Now, a little more about these feasibility reports because the audience is really critical. Usually, the people looking for these kinds of reports are busy decision makers, people who don't have a lot of time to think about all the ins and outs and angles of a proposal. So, if I'm that person, I'm depending on you to do the work of looking at the pros and the cons and the good and the bad and the benefits and the risks and summarizing them and telling me what you think about how feasible this plan is. All right? So, I'm a busy person and I'm depending on you to briefly and succinctly tell me whether or not this proposal makes sense, whether or not we should pursue it, whether or not it's feasible. Okay? Therefore, if you're writing this feasibility report, your answer to that question, is this feasible, needs to be at or near the beginning of the document. And then you follow it with supporting evidence and reasoning. So think of it as your thesis statement without an introduction. Right up front, what should we do? Or what shouldn't we do? And then follow it by your explanation of why and the evidence to support your reasoning. Okay? So it's sort of like bottom line first Here's the problem. Here's what we recommend. Here's why. That's how you structure a good feasibility report. No messing around. No background, lots of background information. Get to the point, to the bottom line first. Now, recommendation reports, on the other hand, skip even the feasibility part. They don't even focus on the analysis of the problem or the analysis of the possible solutions. It gets right to what we should do, right to the conclusions. However, that doesn't mean you haven't done the analysis. A good recommendation report only gets written after sufficient research and good sound analysis of that research and good information coming out of that research and analysis. All right, so you're doing the work, but what you're writing in a recommendation report is only what you recommend, the conclusions. All right. Usually, if you're being asked to write this sort of report, the person asking you probably has faith in you that you're going to do this kind of work, because otherwise that person wouldn't trust you to write this kind of report, because it really does assume that you've done your homework, that you know what you're talking about, right? That you've done that research and you've done that analysis. So you, as the writer, can take quite an authoritative tone and very direct approach. You're assuming that your audience has confidence in you, that what you're about to say is sound. So you can take a good authoritative tone, direct approach, because you know that the information you're about to impart is very important to busy decision makers. All right? So you just write out there, this is what I recommend, and boom. Good, authoritative, confident tone. This justification reports are different from a lot of the kinds of reports we've just been talking about. This comes actually from the writer rather than responding to a request from someone else. Usually, a lot of these short and formal reports come from an external wish to know what's going on. All right? Whereas a justification report really starts with the writer herself or himself. And it comes when you see something within an organization that you feel needs to change, or you feel is wrong and needs to be righted. I don't like using that kind of language, but we really are talking about making recommendations that have not been solicited by anyone else. No one asked you for these recommendations, but you've decided you need to make them. So you are writing, sort of putting yourself out there and taking a good bit of risk by making recommendations that nobody asked you for. All right? So, one of the things as you're thinking about your audience and thinking about how to frame your message, you must need to be thinking about the reader thinking, why would I follow your recommendations? Right? So you really need to think about audience here. You really need to think about the possible negative or at least skeptical responses that might come from you out of the blue, as it were, making recommendations that I didn't ask you to make. All right? So keep that in mind. I need to convince my audience that they should follow my recommendations. All right? And it's possible, given that no one asked you to do this, it's possible that you might get some kind of hostile or defensive response. People might be surprised, first of all, and being surprised might also feel uncomfortable. So they may give you a hard way to go. So it's always a good idea, if you're about to write this kind of report, to give your readers a heads up beforehand. to sort of feel them out, to let them know that you're thinking about making some recommendations about how to change things or tweak things or make things different within an organization. Um, yeah, just try to feel out how people are going to respond so that you can know how much care you need to take with coming across as a credible messenger. All right. Now, this should sound a little familiar to you folks because you've been doing peer review. So you know what peer review is. But sometimes peer review takes a more formal form within an organization, and in that case, reports need to be written based on what happens within a peer review. So, in a peer review report, you have two people of equal status giving each other constructive feedback and criticism. So imagine when you're doing peer review in the classroom and you talk to each other about your responses to each other's writing, imagine instead of talking to each other, putting your feedback, including your criticism, into written form. That's what a peer review report would look like. And like the peer review you are already familiar with, it requires tact. It requires a tone that is encouraging in order to preserve the working relationship between the two of you. Right? This is especially important in a workplace. I mean, you've been doing it within a classroom, and I hope you value the importance of preserving your relationships with each other just as much in the classroom, but it's especially important in the workplace that you think about your tone and remember that your job is to help your peer do the best job she or he can. Right? So you approach the task with that understanding. You're encouraging while you're still being honest, but not being hypercritical, but being, again, doing this in the spirit of my purpose is to help you be the best you can be. And vice versa, since this is a peer enterprise. So, I believe, and I think that it's borne out by others who know these things, that it's always important to start with something positive. So if you are giving people feedback, find something positive to give feedback about. Right? And it's not like, it's highly unlikely that you can't find something good to say, something positive to say, before any other less positive feedback. You want to organize your feedback so that it's as easy to follow as possible. So, take one topic at a time. And one topic at a time, make sure you fully discuss it before you go on to the next. Just like a good essay. One topic at a time, well organized. Say what you need to say, move on to your next topic. And if you have any kind of critique, make sure you can show an example of that critique. Just as if you were doing peer review with each other's writing, you don't want to just say, that something doesn't sound right. You got to show what doesn't sound right. So make sure that you give examples and, if possible, advice for how to improve. Okay? Again, what we're trying to do here is be constructive. Your job is to help people improve. Okay? Now, as I promised, I'm going to spend a little more time talking about a variety of report that you're actually going to be doing for part of your work, your current work in the classroom. And that is a progress report, or what's also known as a status report. This is when you are doing a project. You are monitoring the project for progress and for problems. All right. So you're paying attention to what goes on at agreed upon points, reporting on what's going on, both good and bad. And this could be internal. So if you're within an organization and you're doing some kind of project within an organization, you're monitoring the activities of the employees working on the project. You're looking at, okay, this is how much money we have to spend on the project, given the work that's been done so far. How do we spend our money? How do we allocate the funds? You're making sure that your supervisor knows if there are delays, that so that the people can keep track of those delays, or cost overruns. Because as I believe we've said before, and will be true here, and in most cases when it comes to business, the things that people want to pay attention to and want to know about are how is money being spent and how is time being spent. So delays or cost overruns are risks within any kind of project that you take on, and people pay attention to them. So you're using your report to let people know if there are delays or there are cost overruns and what you're doing about them. All right. So that would be an internal use of a progress report. Or it could be an external review if you're doing a project for someone outside of the organization that you work with, or you're an individual doing a piece of work for someone else. Then what your progress report does is lets your client know how time and money are being spent. Again, time and money, money and time. All right. And if there are any problems with how the time and money are being spent, how those problems are being overcome. So these progress reports really they are designed to reassure a client or whoever it is who's investing time and money in work that you are doing, to reassure that person that the work that they expect will be done on time and within budget. Time and money. Reassuring people that their time and money will be spent well. That's what progress reports do. Okay, what format do we use for progress reports? Well, if you're going to be sending several progress reports over time, then you will probably, and it's not too long a length of time. Let's say it's a year-long report. A year-long project, and you agree to send monthly updates, monthly progress reports. You might do that by email. So we've got regular and routine submissions. Then you can probably use email. If you are doing it on a less regular basis, if you've got like one, as you will for this class, you're going to be submitting one progress report on a project that you've been working on for 6 weeks or so. So in that case, what you want is a signed memo. All right. So that will require you to go back and remember what a good memo looks like, what the components of a good memo are, and you'll follow that format to submit your informal report, your progress report. Now, if this were a project that you were doing for somebody outside of an organization, then it would be written in a letter. Again, as usual, memos for internal, letters for external. So, in your memo, you're going to have, again, we're going back and looking at the components of a good memo. So, a good subject line where you clearly express the purpose of the report. All right, and the purpose of the report here would always start like something like status of ... or report on the progress of ... Okay, but use your subject line well to clearly articulate what this report is about. All right. And then Once you get the subject line right, the body of the memo is good and clear and succinct, where you take chunks of information and you use logical headings so that I know exactly what kind of information I'm about to read and why it's important. Often, these kinds of memos, rather than writing lovely paragraphs, you'll use bullet points or numbered lists because, again, you're just trying to get at the essential information expressed as concisely as possible. Some other features that may be relevant to a progress report of this kind is setting up the memo itself as a timeline. So, background comes first, or overview, summary of achievements. That's the work that we've already gotten done. Work remaining. That's the work we still have to do, with a timetable for completion. And then, at the end, any problems encountered. All right, so you start with the good news. Tell me what's already been done. Then, what needs to still be done. And, have we run into any obstacles along the way? That's the major structure of a progress report in memo form. Just a couple more things to remember about progress reports. And that is that often, if you are taking on a major job and you sign a contract or you have a work agreement, the contract or work agreement will include specific dates or specific phases of the work being done when progress must be reported. So, the contract or the agreement itself should give you an idea of when and how often you need to generate and contribute these short informal status reports. If you do not do that, once you sign a contract or a work agreement that says, in part, that you will do regular progress reports, if you don't do it, you could lose that contract. You would be in violation of the agreement. So this is not a small matter. This is important. If your client, your customer, wants regular information about the progress of the job, you had better give it to them, and give it to them when you say you will, because otherwise you're going to lose that work. All right. And again, the client may not need to have daily or weekly or monthly reports. It may be as needed, but you need to be really clear when you're agreeing to do a body of work that you know and you have agreed with your customer about when and how often the customer wants progress reports. Nice, if there isn't this regular intervals thing, then a nice way to think about it is what are our milestones? What are the key pieces of progress along the way till we get to the end product of whatever we're doing? Let's do our reports then. So that may not be monthly. You may have initial research that takes half of the time for the whole project. But that would be a milestone at which you would say, okay, we've accomplished this research. Then to actually implement what you learn may only take a short amount of time. So your milestone would be 2 weeks from now. So it doesn't always have to be on a regular basis. It could be based on when you think the most important things are going to happen along this timeline. All right? So, that's what we've got for varieties of informal reports. And as I said, you'll be generating one as part of your ongoing research project. And I wish you well with it. And talk to you later.